Okay, gang, howdy. This is the final video that I will be recording this semester for this class, the final reading in our final module, our fifth and final module, and the final reading is an introductory essay for a special issue of a journal. You guys know, I hope, journals have these like issues. There's usually 4 a year, that's why they're known as quarterlies. And it's a single kind of thin issue. Used to be, printed on physical paper, and it was thin, but dense. A lot of, important technical stuff in there. And so it's just a series of articles, maybe some book reviews, forums, or whatever. But the idea of a special issue is let's devote an entire issue of this journal, which again comes out every maybe 3 or 4 months, to a single topic or theme. And they, journals like to do this every once in a while when there's an important, thing happening in the world. Let's devote a special issue to it. And so that's what we got here. Rhetoric Society Quarterly is the journal. That's an important journal in rhetoric. And you'll note that we are dealing with, I think, our most recent reading, which makes sense because I like to try to end off overview of rhetoric classes current and as up to the moment as possible. So this is just last year this came out. And we're talking about AI. And so this, to my knowledge, is about as fresh as we can get in terms of like what's happening in the world, in terms of this emergence of AI, and then what rhetoric scholars are starting to say about all this. Scholarship takes a while to produce. This thing probably took a few years. In fact, sad to say, I know that one of the authors in the special issue here that they mentioned, Misty Yang, who is actually a graduate of our program, our master's program. She graduated from our program probably about 10 years ago. She's a friend, brilliant scholar. Sad to say, Misty Yang passed away last year. Was it last year? No, it was 23. We had our last conference. I'm hosting a conference with some colleagues, small kind of conference where we bring scholars out to talk about rhetoric stuff, and we invited Misty to come out to this conference. This was back in 23 in the spring, and she passed away from cancer just a couple of weeks after our conference. And so this has clearly been in the works since before that happened. And the point is that, it takes a little while for scholars to think about things, to research, to write, to get comments on their stuff, to make revisions, and to get everyone together, and then to go through the production process. And, articles take some time, books even longer. So this is, again, about as fresh as it gets. There's probably some other stuff that's coming out right now, but anyway, we're up to speed in terms of the field and what it's kind of saying about this new development. All right, so I apologize. It's definitely more technical and dense than you guys are probably comfortable with, but I was mostly just wanting to kind of show you here. Look, this is what's happening in rhetoric right now. There's a single issue of a top rhetoric journal devoted to, what is AI? How do we want to think about this? And so I just put together some notes for y'all just to kind of like hit the key main ideas, just so we have a flavor of the conversation that's taking shape right now. And that's about it. Like, as the authors themselves note, this is a hard kind of thing to enter into because it's moving so quickly. I've heard over the years this idea of like, change happens at certain kinds of rates, but technological change, because the very nature of the technology is getting better and better, the change happens quicker and quicker, right? And so, it wasn't very long ago that the internet didn't exist, but then it did exist, and all these digital devices and technologies are like compounding in terms of new developments and new innovations, and it's hard to describe. This was kind of geometric growth that's happening, right? Where the next thing, compound interest, right? It's like getting bigger and bigger and faster and faster and faster. So AI in particular, because it's able to kind of leap into these qualitatively new realms quicker than just a kind of sequential linear process might assume, it's going to be difficult to sort of hit the target here because it's moving so quickly. So the technology is advancing much, much faster than academics can study it, think about it, comment on it, write about it, and it's hard to kind of do it justice. So they acknowledge this idea that we are in the midst of this kind of revolutionary moment here. And so I was talking with students this week, and, how are you guys sort of like doing with AI? Are you working with it? Do you know much about it? Are you thinking about it consciously as something that you want to pursue and learn about and maybe even incorporate into your professional life and identity? What do you think about its possibilities, its threats, its all the exciting stuff, but all the terrifying stuff, right? And we had a pretty good conversation, and it seems like most everyone is sort of excited, but a little nervous, and we're all kind of playing around with these new tools. I'm doing that I've mentioned many times in my classes. I'm using, Claude to help me generate ideas for class stuff, and, to do very mechanical kinds of tasks. You can ask it to do that and help you. And the speed with which it is able to do stuff very, very effectively and quickly is pretty remarkable. And so, the basic gist of this introductory piece here, as I note in the second prompt there, is that there's basically just like three major points that the authors want to make here. The title talks about rhetoric of and with AI. This business of rhetoric of versus rhetoric as is a kind of older distinction that we talk about in rhetoric. If you go back into just go back into the library database and look up rhetoric and the sort of the titles of essays, the titles of books, maybe not so recently, but for many decades there in the 20th century, to do rhetoric was to talk about talk, right? To analyze rhetoric was to analyze talking, speaking, speeches, words, how it is that people were trying to orally and argumentatively influence one another, right? And so presidential speeches and debates and that kind of stuff. We are people, rhetoricians are people who analyze the talk of other people, right? So that is the rhetoric of. And so there's a lot of titles of articles and books out there. The rhetoric of science, the rhetoric of style and fashion, the rhetoric of policy, the rhetoric of, the environment. And so that's rhetoric scholars examining how it is that people talk about things. It's not so much that we're interested in the thing itself, we're interested in how we talk about it. Like Decoding Abortion Rhetoric is this book that Celeste Condit published decades ago when I was first coming into the field. And it's not about abortion as good, bad, right, wrong, but about the conversation about abortion, how it is we talk about abortion, how it is that we make arguments, the kinds of resources that we draw on. Dr. Emma Bloomfield, published a book recently on science and science versus narratives, or science versus stories, or science and stories. And she looks at how, not the actual science, but how it is we talk about science, right? And that does matter, how it is we communicate in public about these things. You don't necessarily have to be an expert on DNA to say something about how people talk about DNA, right? So that's the rhetoric of approach. That's examining the talk about. Okay, so there's lots of talk about AI, and we can talk about how it is that people talk about AI. Just broadly speaking, as these two people are talk about AI, they are talking about it in ways that are both hopeful and fearful, right? And so we could examine the discourse about AI as both optimistic and concerned, right? Or terrified even, or something like that. And we could look at all the different articles and maybe podcasts and videos about people talking about AI, whether they're excited or they're terrified, and we can do an analysis of that discourse, and that's rhetoric. People talking about things, all right? So that's the first approach, and they're kind of saying, so number one, first of all, in the first paragraph, they make that kind of dual thing of like, we are both excited and terrified. They say, it has this revolutionary potential in the second sentence there. Revolutionary potential. I keep hearing this over and over again. It's going to change everything. Bill Gates says that AI within 10 years is going to turn everything into a 2-day work week, right? And meanwhile, Donald Trump is trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Now imagine a scenario where we have all these businesses opening up factories and creating, manufacturing production kinds of work here in the States at the same time as automation and robotics are taking off, right? And so, because I keep hearing like Who's going to want to do these factory jobs? Who's going to want to work in the fields, the farm fields, and so on? Well, maybe we won't need to, right? Maybe we're able to just use automation. Amazon does this pretty effectively. As far as I know, their factories are highly automated and just machines running around getting everything ready for shipping. So this is part of the like turbulence and uncertainty of our moment here, is like, how much is going to change? And are we excited about a 2-day work week, or are we terrified, right? Does that mean that we're out of work? Does that mean, where's the money coming from? How are we going to live? Right? It potentially can change everything about the economy, about labor, about what it means to be a person or not a person, what it means to be in a relationship, what it means to so many things, right? And so that's the number one thing that they want to acknowledge, is like, this moment is enormous. So many enormous moments right now. And so we want to just sort of acknowledge that, like, it's an enormous and a potentially wonderful way. I get excited about cures for cancer, or, they talk about how it could revolutionize all kinds of medicine or psychological analysis, and being able to do deep, complex thinking about problems that humans are still struggling with, right? So there are wonderful potentials and opportunities here, but at the same time, what about if it sort of takes a life of its own? What if it becomes kind of untethered from human control? This consciousness business is hard to imagine, even philosophically, but like, a thing can be automated and not be conscious, and it, like your little those little circular vacuum cleaners, like, they seem like they're automated. They do the work on their own. They don't have consciousness, but they still do a lot, right? So anyway, I think we're entering a wild future, and it's happening quickly. So I'm trying on my own to learn as much as I can about algorithms, to use them, or AI systems, to use them, to understand them, to be critical of them at the same time as to work with them, right? And so the authors go from, first point is that conundrum of we're excited but we're terrified. The next point is, we can look at AI as a conversation, how it is that we're talking about it. That's sort of traditional rhetoric. And as they say in that final paragraph on the first page there, two primary areas of emerging inquiry: rhetorical scholarship that takes up AI as an object of criticism. That's how it is that we analyze artificial intelligence as a cultural phenomenon, how it is that people talk about it, what it's doing. So it's out there and we're analyzing it. And two, rhetorical scholarship that uses AI methodologically. So that's the with. So the rhetoric of is the talk about AI, or the goings on out there, and what we're doing and how we're talking about it, and how we're thinking about it, and how that's all manifesting as rhetorical expression and practice and behavior and so on. But we can also think about how it is that AI is a kind of tool that offers potentially methodological options for actually doing the work of analyzing rhetoric. So on the one hand, it's the thing we're studying, and the second hand, it's the thing that we're studying with. It's the thing that we're using as an instrument, as a very sort of dimensional calculator. That's how I think about these. Calculators that can do so much more, right? But it's a tool, but it can help us really maybe understand language at a much bigger scale than traditional criticism that looks at this little event or that little speech, or, it's kind of limited by scale, all right? So first, again, I'm still on number 2 in the notes here. First, AI is both exhilarating and terrifying. Second, rhetoric scholars can examine the rhetoric of talk about AI in various ways, arguments about, conversations about, all right? Third, rhetoric scholars can use AI as a new methodology for analyzing rhetoric, right? So there's all kinds of programs that exist for processing data, for interpreting and analyzing data. Well, what if AI became another tool like that? Now, we've got to shore things up and become more, confident in the accuracy of the systems, right? And so things can get technical at this point, but obviously I think we can understand that these things can do so many things. They can analyze, they can crunch numbers, they can explore so many different texts. And, that's what rhetoric scholars do, is we examine text. We examine the realm of words and language as it's written down, as it's spoken, right? To the extent that there is a kind of documentary trace of someone speaking or talking, whether it's writing or videos or whatever AI has access to is also what rhetorical scholars have access to. So it's weird to think that we're creating this thing that is effectively able to do the work of rhetorical analysis on its own. If you give it enough prompting and enough data, it can go and talk about patterns and talk about figures and tropes and how they're noticing different deep things at a deep level. So there's exciting possibilities for working with these tools as well. All right. So that's the third point there. And then with the caution and the reminder but human scholars are still needed. You still need experts to kind of be guiding things. So when we were talking about, do we use AI in class and, how do we use it and so on, I was heartened to hear one student talk about how she we'll use it to maybe get feedback on an essay for editing or whatever. And she said that she actually doesn't like some of the suggestions that her AI engine offers her. And she says, that's not me. That's not my voice. That's not what I want to say or how I want to say it. And I was like, yay, good. We still need to be the voices. We still need to be the brains that are driving these things and using these things. And so whenever I see AI show up in submissions, because it's obviously happening, students are using it, they're submitting stuff, it's become pretty clear that, if perfect spelling and a certain kind of mechanical tone and certain consistencies and headings, and it's like, oh, that's AI, right? And sometimes there's a better use of AI and sometimes there's worse use. And so instead of just saying you used AI, fail, I'm trying to guide students now with, you got to work with AI. You've got to prompt it. You've got to guide it. You've got to steer it. You are still the kind of the creator and the author, and you're just using it to kind of go find things and offer up interpretations, right? But that's the way I'm trying to think about this, is we still want subject matter experts. The human brain is still better. It's still grounded in something like a human spirit or soul or something that these machines don't have. And so, do they have ethics? Do they have the ability to weigh pros and cons in terms of human values, in terms of what's good and bad, and so on? I don't know. That's where I get concerned, is that moral dimension of what's going on inside of these things. So I think you still want humans guiding, making the decisions, steering things, but using them to quickly go off and find and, hey, try this out. I think of them as like an excited puppy. It's like, go think about this and report back. And it goes, yay! And it just goes, and then it's like, what do you think of this, right? But it doesn't know what it's telling you. It's all probabilistic. It's just anticipating, It can look really good and it can offer up some really useful insights, but, there's no soul there and there's no consciousness behind that actually knows what it's saying. It's just kind of like spitting stuff back at you. So you still need to be the final filter and the decision maker. So that's kind of mostly what I wanted to say here about this piece. It's like I said, I'm aware that it's more detailed and technical than we want, but if you follow the notes here and just kind of hit the few kind of main ideas, I think we'll be okay. The business of like working with AI, they offer some interesting examples on the top of 226 there. So it's kind of cool to see, I guess, rhetoric scholars. They do mention an article by Bloomfield and Tillery. Obviously, that's Emma Bloomfield, my colleague, and maybe you've had a class with her. Denise Tillery's over in English on our campus, and they did a kind of large-scale study where they use these tools to analyze and crunch and recognize whatever. So it's happening. There's some exciting possibilities because, again, the dimensionality and that scale question that kicks in on prompt number 5 there, in the normal course of doing an analysis of some kind, you can only kind of handle so much. And I think the existing programs, and I don't use them, I'm more of an old school, just like reading stuff, coming up with the ideas. I don't use quantitative, broad data sets and so on. I'm more of a organic, textual, critical humanist. But there's some really interesting possibilities here for dealing with specifically huge amounts of data and huge amounts of text and roaming around across the surface of the textual landscape to find these kind of deep connections and patterns and how it is that people talk about things and express themselves. So there could be some really interesting possibilities here. But again, it's a weird moment where the very thing that is changing everything about, or potentially could change everything about how it is that we live together and communicate together, is also the tool for studying essentially itself, right? And so I don't know that I'm ever personally going to go that deep in terms of using it to, be the sort of analyst or examiner, kind of like the partnership thing here. But I do want to use it and explore its possibilities. And I'm very curious to see how this phenomenon is going to evolve. Not over 5 and 10 years, but literally over 1 and 2 and 3 years. Like, the change is so remarkable, day by day, month by month. So, keep an eye on it. Do be thinking about it. It's coming. And the thing about AI is it shows up in a way that we might not often recognize, right? Because it is so convincing, because it is so good at presenting itself as not itself, right? That's sort of an interesting rhetorical insight, is you are most rhetorically effective when your rhetorical devices cannot be seen. It's like a magician. A magician is most effective when the magic can't be seen. No such thing as actual magic. We're not wizards here. There are always some kind of trick, some kind of sleight of hand, some kind of device or mechanism that makes the act seem like magic, but it's just tricks, right? Well, rhetoric's kind of the same. It's we're influencing and we're appealing and we're massaging your perception in ways that you don't really understand. That's the most effective, is not being able to actually know when you're being persuaded. And that's, I think, where AI is going, is like, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference between the fake and the real. And that's an interesting and unsettling place to be, and we are so close to being there, right? Think about how many things are already happening. Well, how would we know? How would we know if 40% of what you see online is already fake? Ugh. These are just big, broad questions. Anyway, that's the gist of this piece. AI is here. It's revolutionary. It's very exciting and also terrifying. We can think about AI as a phenomenon that we talk about, and we can analyze the talk about it and the cultural activities surrounding it and what it's doing and what it's affecting and what it's changing. And we can also think about it as a tool, as a kind of new methodology that we use to understand communication and language in a deep, complex, dynamic way, right? There you go, gang. So that is the end of our journey together. It does make sense to talk about AI as the last thing, because it is a rhetorical phenomenon. As I just said, it's about appearances. It's about conjuring certain kinds of experiences and reactions in an audience. It's about moving and influencing and shaping and altering and modifying. It's very much about how we live together and the terms of our social relations and how we conduct ourselves. And so definitely a rhetorical phenomenon, definitely the thing that's coming in a major, major way. It's going to be disruptive in good ways and bad ways. And so that seems like the place we should probably leave off. There's some question marks. There's some uncertainty, of course, but that's sort of always the case. And so hopefully, the readings, the concepts, the conversations we've been having have helped to awaken the sort of like rhetorical dynamics that surround us all every day. Because it's a lot. Now, it can seem overwhelming, but hopefully, with the knowledge that you've gained and maybe the attitude, this sort of critical attitude that wants to ask questions about where things are coming from and how I am being targeted by, instruments and machines and algorithms and so on that are coming at my data and want to show me things and reveal things to me in certain ways. We live in a kind of rhetorical world, right? Everything about this digital world is about kind of massaging and managing appearances and perceptions, and it's wild and it's exciting, but it's also terrifying. So we're already kind of in this space, and we're going to be moving more and more into this space. My argument is that rhetoric matters more and more today because we can't really see it or notice it, it's become so subtle and effective, and it's all kind of happening at this digital level, right? And it's changing so much. So let's keep asking those questions. Let's keep being quizzical and skeptical, and engage in healthy, critical, investigations, and try to better understand where our sources of influence are coming. And because there's power there. Sometimes there's uglier stuff than power. Sometimes there's better stuff. But it's good to know where things are coming from and how they're working on us. All right, I'll shut up there. I'm around, of course, if anyone wants to chat. But I hope you had a good time. Best of luck with final assignments, and wishing everyone well. Peace.